Thank you for Professor Terry Lung. My name is Jun Han. I'm a graduate from University of Oxford, majoring in sociology, and now I work as a postdoctoral fellow at Georgetown University's Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation. So my training is sociology, but my PhD research and also present research is on NGOs, social enterprises, social innovation, this kind of stuff. So it's my great honor and pleasure to visit Hong Kong University. Actually, this is my third time here, but the first time to come to the Faculty of Social Sciences. And and today, thank you for having me today. So today I would like to talk about the relations between social marketization and policy change based on evidence from the US and UK and China. So the majority of this research is based on my PhD research, and also I added some of my postdoctoral content. My presentation is structured as follows. Firstly, I would like to introduce the research questions and the key concepts. And then I will review the literature and propose the hypothesis. After introducing data and measurement, I report the results. Furthermore, I would like to discuss the process and the mechanism from social marketization to policy change before I make the conclusion and discuss the implication of this research. Finally, I'd like to highlight some future research directions. There are two research questions, two overarching research questions that guide my research. That is, what kinds of social sector organizations are more likely to achieve policy change, and how and why can some of them achieve policy change? This research question is important because the prior research usually focuses on how the state controls or co-opts NGOs, or how the NGOs survive or die, in particular in the authoritarian Chinese context. While the influence of the social organizations or NGOs on the state, particularly on the government policies, are significantly understudied. To give a brief context, so social organizations or NGOs in China emerged and developed in China very quickly in the past 3 decades. So basically in 1988, there are about 5,000 social organizations in China, while by the end of 2016, the total number has exceeded 700,000. So the average annual growth rate is 100%. So it is 2 times that of the Chinese GDP growth. So this is a very significant, social phenomenon. And behind this significant increase of the social organizations, there is a new tendency which can be conceptualized as social marketization. So by social marketization, that I mean social organizations use entrepreneurial and marketized strategies to address social problems, meet social demands, and create social values. So basically, social marketization includes 3 indicators. The first is social entrepreneurship. So I will discuss more about it. And another is obtaining government contracts for purchasing services. So this research argues that the new tendency of social marketization can empower the social organizations to achieve policy change from the government. And we can set up a hypothesis that when other factors are equal, social organizations that have transformed into social enterprises or obtained government contracts for purchasing services are more likely to succeed in promoting policy change when other factors are equal. So there is a good reason to make such a hypothesis that social marketization can lead to policy change. Because as Chinese economy grows, there are a lot of social problems, a lot of social demands are emerging. And the social organizations can design and conduct professional services to address these problems as their unique solutions to address these social problems. So when they use marketized strategies to address social problems, their service income grows. When their service income grows, they can address these social problems sustainably. And if they can address the social problems sustainably, they actually can make a difference to their social problems. And thus, they create a positive social change. And a positive social change will sooner or later, directly or indirectly, will promote the policy change. And therefore, the seemingly apolitical marketization process at the very beginning may in the end lead to a political consequence, that is a policy change. This process is theoretically interesting and practically important because in China, we all know that China have no democratic mechanism to influence government policy, like elections, like party competitions. However, if social organizations can, address social problems, use social change to influence government policy, that would be interesting. that can also make government accountable even without democratic participation of the political process. So making government accountable without democracy is why the new tendency, social marketization, is interesting and important. So this is my hypothesis. The next step for me is to use empirical data to test this hypothesis and show the process and the underlying mechanism. So to test this hypothesis, I did the literature review. Based on the existing literature review, I have grouped the factors that lead to the policy change. I grouped them into 4 groups of variables. They are issue and resource, social marketization, policy advocacy, and institution. So we know that NGOs or social organizations can work in diverse issue areas. You name it, right? Social health, environment, science and technology, business support, so on and so forth. And different organizations working in different issue areas may have differences in participating in promoting policy change. And the existing research finds that the NGOs or NPOs working in the environment, health, civil rights, or education are more likely to lobby the government than other NGOs working in other issue areas. And resource mobilization theory and resource-dependent theory highlights the role of resources. So basically, social organizations which have, they rely on these resources to survive and strive, and they need the resources to pursue their goals. So it's natural to expect that social organizations with more resources are more likely to achieve policy change. And resources include financial resources, human resources, and other resources like recognition and legitimacy. So social marketization is my focus. That it includes social entrepreneurship and government procurement of services. So social entrepreneurship is using commercial techniques, business techniques to address social problems and meet social demands and promote sustainable social change. While the proportion of service income in the overall income of an organization is a critical indicator of whether this organization is a non-profit or the social enterprise. And existing literature has highlighted substantial growth of service and sales in the overall income of a non-profit, and also the substituting grants and donations with commercial revenue as an indicator to measure the social entrepreneurship. The second dimension of social marketization is achieving government contracts for purchasing services. So assigning contracts with the government is important because it has set up formal institutional channels to communicate with the government. So the NPOs can inform the government how I address social issues and how well I address them. If the government feel that, wow, their solution is good, their practice is good, they can probably absorb their practice into a part of their policy. So this become so the government are more willing to adopt similar approach of this developed by these NGOs, by this social innovation as a part of its policy design. The third dimension is policy advocacy. So social organizations can use diverse techniques to advocate the government. Policy advocacy can be divided into insider advocacy and outside advocacy. So insider advocacy or direct advocacy include, I will discuss later, but just to give a definition here is to interact or work directly with the government, while outsider is to without directly participating in the policy making process. The final group of variables is institutionalism. So basically, corporatism highlights the leadership cooptation. So NGOs with government point leaders or NGOs who has a leader with the prior work background in the government may more likely to achieve policy change according to the cooperative theory. So neo-institutionalism actually believe that organizational structures and behaviors are shaped by institutional factors, and we can measure these factors by quantify them. And so to survive and grow, these organizations need to conform to these institutional factors. So based on the literature review, I have set up this analytical framework. So I basically use these variables, 4 groups of variables, to predict the likelihoods of achieving policy change and also the influence on government policy. The data are twofold. So one is from the UK data, and other is the Chinese data. And in terms of the measurement, I have selected 2 dependent variables. The first is the likelihood of success in achieving policy change. So basically, the survey asked them, So whether you have organization once achieved the policy change, yes or no, 1 or 0, it's a yes or no to logistic regression, right? The second is influence on government policy. So it's a scale measurement from 1 to 5. No influence, not a strong influence, fairly strong influence, and a very strong influence from 1 to 5 in the measurement. In terms of issue areas, I have listed 14 issue areas like science and technology, education, social service boards, so on and so forth. They are coded as dummy variable. So in terms of resources, I measure the financial resources, which is the income size of an organization, and human resources is the full-time staff size and or volunteer size, and other resources such as recognition and legitimacy, which is measured by the organizational age. So when an organization becomes older, we can assume that it has gathered more legitimacy and recognition. Social marketization. So basically, social entrepreneurship is measured by, as I mentioned earlier, that whether it has 50% or more of income from the commercial income, right? If it is below this commercial, we can argue that their main income are from donations. In that case, they are charities, not a social enterprise. And also, or whether it has devoted 50% of its profits to the social goals. If they, 100% distributed its profits, it is a commercial enterprise. But only if it has devoted 50% or more profits or surplus to the social goals, we can regard it as social enterprise because that is what it means, social, right? The second is achieving government contract for purchasing services. So the survey director asks them whether or not you have achieved government contracts in the past, 3 years, yes or no. So the policy advocacy, I was measured by the intensity of whether the organization undertake this kind of activities. For the insider advocacy, we have measured whether the organization joined government conferences, whether they have submitted research reports to the government, whether they direct lobby the government, whether they ask the general public to contact the government, and whether they use personal guanxi to contact the government. So the intensity is the total number of these activities overall in the 1 year. So the intensity of outsider advocacy. So outsider advocacy means whether you use a media to influence government, whether you build coalitions with other peer organizations, whether you use a judicial approach to influence government, whether you use a collective action or organized public rallies. So the intensity of outsider advocacy is the total number of these activities in 1 year for the organization. The institutional license, basically, I use them as a control variable. So I measure, not control, but as a fourth group of variables. So whether the organizational leader was government appointed, whether the leader of the organization had prior work experience in the government sector, and the regulatory environment is what kind of this organization is registered, what category this registered, and what level of administrative level this organization registered, and where these organizations operate in which geographical regions. Okay, let me report the descriptive statistics. So basically, in China, 6% of social organizations, they self-perceived as they have once successfully achieved the policy change. And in terms of policy influence, the UK ones is 2.8, while the Chinese one is 2.4. So in terms of social enterprises, in the UK social enterprise, third section organizations, there are 45% of these organizations are self-regarded, are measured as social enterprises, while in China, this proportion is a bit low. It's 33%. So in terms of achieving government contracts, almost 30% of the UK social enterprise once achieved government contracts, while this in China, the proportion is a bit low. It's just around 6%. And I would like to have a look at the regression results. And based on the UK data, we can find that it supports a hypothesis that the social entrepreneurship and achieving government contracts are positively related to the, of a dependent variables. And in terms of the Chinese data, the results is similar, that social entrepreneurship and achieving government contracts are positively related to the, success in achieving policy change. But what is different is that, the social entrepreneurship is negatively related to the policy influence, the influence on policy making. So what does this mean? This means that social organizations, when they become social enterprises, they did not engage directly with a policy making process, but they can still achieve policy change. This would be interesting, right? So how to explain this phenomena? So my explanation is that social enterprise, they focus on their work. They want to be professional, and their goal is to create a social impact. And they do not engage directly with the government. They do not work directly with the government, but they can still change government policy because their social impact has inspired the government or pressured the government to adopt their solutions or change their policies. And this logic will be reflected in my qualitative analysis. So from the quantitative analysis, we can find that the social marketization is positively related to policy change, right? But this is just the association. And how do we know what is the process and how it, what is the underlying mechanism? So basically, when social organizations become marketized, they transfer to social enterprises, they generate commercial income. They need to be professional. They need to collaborate with the upstream organizations and the downstream organizations, right? So they need to establish their, I call social value chains, just like enterprises establish supply chain in the commercial market. So this social value chain, when this social value chain was established, they are equipped to address social issues, and then more likely to create positive social change. And this social change will sooner or later will trigger the policy change. And the underlying mechanism is the establishment of social value chains. So by social value chains, that I mean 4 groups of organizations. The first is infrastructure organization. So infrastructure organization is provide institutional, legal, sectoral infrastructure for operating frontline organizations. So the second is financial organizations, such as foundations, impact investment agencies. They are providing financial resources to frontline organizations. The third is support organizations, which is deliver technical support, managerial support, like incubator, like consulting firms in the non-profit sector. The final one is operating organizations, like they are deliver the frontline services, especially like social worker agencies that provide the frontline services to the needy people. So I would like to select 2 cases as some examples to map out to talk about the process. And I choose the 2 cases. One is the non-profit incubator, which is established in 2006, headquartered in Shanghai. Basically, this organization is provide incubation services, capacity building, and seed funding for nascent and grassroots NGOs. The second organization is China Foundation Center, which is established in 2010 in China to increase the transparency of the foundation sector in China. And I would like to talk about the first case, which is NPI. Basically, NPI has changed 3 policy change. The 3 policy are non-profit incubation policy, venture philanthropy competition, and the national charity affairs. I will go through one by one. So the non-profit incubation policy was rooted in the non-profit incubator project devised by NPI many years ago. And this project is to address the social problem is that the nascent NGOs have survival difficulties. They have no working space. They have needed capacity to register. They can't secure supervisory agencies. They have no initial funding. So the incubator project is actually gather these elements to provide an egg for these organizations and provide these elements for these NGOs to grow and survive. And it proved effective. And more NGOs, through their incubation, become legally registered, especially at first in Shanghai. And the Shanghai government find, this is a good innovation, this is a good practice, and they gradually absorb this practice into a part of their policy, and they request the newly registered organizations to receive such kind of incubator services in Shanghai. And then gradually this policy spread from Shanghai to other regions of China. The second policy is a venture philanthropy competition. So it is also rooted in the venture philanthropy project devised by NPI, in Shanghai and Beijing. And this is market mechanism because it has, introduced the mechanism, the competition, because this project aims to address the problem that nascent NGOs are lack of funding. So NPI set up the venture philanthropy by attracting the resources from the novel company, corporate social responsibility department, from the private foundations and foreign foundations, and then with these resources channeled down through the venture philanthropy competition into these grassroots NGOs, nascent NGOs, it has relieved the social organizations' funding shortage, and this practice was proved, effective, and many nascent NGOs got funding from different private and foreign foundations, and you know what? Several years later, the Shanghai government has organized a similar, venture philanthropy competition. They call it Community Venture Philanthropy Competition. This became an annual event in Shanghai, and this practice also from Shanghai to other cities. The third one is national charity fairs. This is, this policy is a national policy initiated by the Ministry of Civil Affairs, established in 2012. Actually, this is rooted also in the non-profit exhibition events, right? This project is to address a social problem that NGOs are lack of awareness. NGOs are lack of, perception, public perceptions. So they could not raise funding. They could not get legitimacy. But this exhibition, so NPI has incubated many small NGOs, and then it organized the exhibition events and open to the public. So general public can come to donate, to get aware of them, and this event has enhanced the social organization's public awareness. And the Ministry of Civil Affairs find this is a good practice, right? And then it has set up a nationwide exhibition fairs in Shenzhen, organized since 2012. Let us see the second case, that is the China Foundation Center. It has promoted the two policy change. The first is information disclosure of foundations. The second is policy of free lunch for children. So we know that in China, foundations need to submit annual reports to the government sector, but the government did not release their information. So we don't know how these foundations in China spend their money. They are lack of transparency. This issue become very serious, particularly in the Guomei accident. And the general public questioned the transparency of foundations, especially government background foundations, very critically. And China Foundation Center has developed a product called the Foundation Transparency Ranking. So basically, they collect the data of these foundations from their annual reports, from their website, and they set up a ranking system. This has created competition for these foundations. So these foundations feel the pressure. They are more and more foundations gradually to release their information through their annual reports, through their website, through their mass media, and this practice has enhanced the foundation transparency. And the local government find this practice, this so-called social inspection, is effective. So they are more willing to release their information of these foundations to a third-party platform like CFC, like other foundations. So this become a policy of some local governments. The second policy change is a policy of free lunch for children. We know that there is a social problem in the rural China. The different townships and different counties are merged, right? So the rural schools are also merged, and these rural children could not commute back home to take lunch. So there are no lunch when they are at schools. This becomes a social problem. And there is a journalist called Deng Fei has established a charity called the Free Lunch for Children. Basically, he established an online platform, and ordinary people like me, I once purchased their 3 yuan lunch from their platform. And this platform transferred the money directly to the school at the rural area, and the school has hires the chefs and produce the lunch for the rural children. And yes, I donated the money. I buy their product through their platform, but I don't know whether my money has really reached the rural children, right? So CFC has established an information disclosure platform to track the flow of this money from the ordinary citizens to particular school. And if I find, my money was well received and well spent, I would be more willing to purchase their products and would be more willing to donate. So this kind of practice has improved the childhood nutrition. And several years in the past, from the beginning of this platform, of this charity, in the 6 years, this become a national social movement, and more people donate their money through this platform to transfer to the rural area. And 6 years later, the central government, the former Prime Minister Wen Jiabao has, announced a national policy that the central government will cover all the lunches for the rural children at the all national level poor counties to cover their free lunches. This funding was directly from the central government. So it has changed the government policy, even the central government policy. So when we examine the two cases, we can find that how they can succeed to influence government policy, because they have created positive social change. But behind this is a mechanism that they have established social value chains. They have collaborated with different organizations, right? They have collaborated with some infrastructure organizations, government organized NGOs. They provide infrastructure. They have worked with foundations, private foundations, foreign foundations, and companies. They have worked with some support organizations. They provide technical support, management support, and they work with the operating organization. So behind the success of the two cases actually is the establishment of social value chains, just like the supply chain in the commercial area. So when we use the social value chains to look at three cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, we can find that we have more findings actually. We have found that the three cities has actually developed three models of social innovation, three models of social management. I choose the three cities because Beijing is a political center, Shanghai is an economic center, and Shenzhen is a frontier city of reform and opening up. So what are the three policy models? Beijing is a top-down model, Shenzhen is a bottom-up model, and Shanghai is a platform model. Let me explain. Beijing actually is a top-down model because it has top-down reform the government organized NGOs or mass organizations, 群众组织, and reform them to become infrastructure organizations and financial organizations. Why Beijing can develop such a model? Because Beijing has have a lot of gongos and mass organizations in history. And on the other hand, the grassroots NGOs in Beijing has severe survival difficulties. So how to collect the two groups of variables, group of organizations? Actually, it has approach that established so-called hub-type organizations. Basically, this means that the government, pursue the existing gongos, government organizations, NGOs, and make them become an infrastructure for other NGOs. They may do not do the frontline work. They may do not serve the needy people directly, but they can provide the infrastructure, right? They can help these grassroots NGOs to register. They can become the supervisory agencies for grassroots NGOs. And they can provide resources distribution from the government funding, from the government procurement of service NGOs from their platform. So from 2009 to 2015, 36 hub-type organizations in Beijing was established and certified. And subsequently, the growing government procurement of social organizations was managed and distributed through the system of hub-type organizations. So Beijing's approach is to make the government-organized NGOs become infrastructure organizations, and for the operating organizations. So this is a top-down policy initiative, and which has facilitated the growth of the social organizations. So basically, social organizations in Beijing has also witnessed significant growth in the past 15 years. Shanghai is different. Shanghai is a platform model because Shanghai has no such a large number of gongos, but Shanghai has its resources. Shanghai has many venture philanthropy, venture capital organizations, have a lot of intermediate organizations, they are active in corporate social responsibility, social entrepreneurship. So Shanghai developed a platform model because it has scaled up the support organizations to make them become platforms, to make the platforms for grassroots organizations. And these platforms can be a platform for resource distribution. And the prominent of the signal of this platform model is that Shanghai has established the Shanghai Social Innovation Park. It's even called zone model, right? Because they establish a dome or a park that for these NGOs to grow and receive different resources and policy support. Just like the local governments to incubate startups and high-tech firms. This is a bit similar. And you know what? This model has spread from Shanghai to other regions of China. And by the end of the 2014, 15 major Chinese cities have adopted such a platform model. And this is the distribution of these platforms in China. So basically, it is that Shanghai has the highest number of this kind of platforms and gradually spread to other regions of China. Based on the platforms, Shanghai has organized the venture philanthropy competitions, which is the first large-scale government procurement of services from NGOs by introducing competition mechanism. So basically, the NGOs will present their product, they will roadshow, and then the government will select and also introduce the external funding to fund these NGOs. So this is venture philanthropy competition. And with the financial and technical support from the non-profit platforms, the ecosystem of social organizations in Shanghai has also witnessed a growth. Shenzhen is a bottom-up model because Shenzhen is, first city to open a direct registration for grassroots NGOs. So grassroots NGOs can register as operating organizations. They have enhanced the downstream of the social value chains. And Shenzhen can develop such a kind of model because Shenzhen is a frontier city. It has a lot of experience in policy experiment and policy innovation, particularly in the for the startups, for the enterprises. But Shenzhen can apply this experience to incubate enterprises, to incubate social sector organizations. So in 2004, Shenzhen has loosened the dual management system and lowered the registration threshold for grassroots NGOs to register. In 2008, Shenzhen has opened direct registration for 3 categories of social organizations. In 2012, the direct registration mechanism was opened to additional 5 categories of social organizations. And this kind of policy rooted from Shenzhen and become a national policy in 2016, implemented by China charity law. Another prominent policy innovation in Shenzhen is that it promotes the development of professional social worker agencies. From 2007 to 2012, Shenzhen have generated a lot of money from the welfare lottery fund to directly fund social worker agencies. And in 2009, Shenzhen announced 800 social worker positions funded by local government funding. And they provide 66,000 Chinese yuan to 1 position of social worker. And among them, 60% are for their salary, and 6% is for the operating cost for the social worker agency. And this level of funding has raised to 93,000 in 2016. So basically, this innovation actually attract a lot of social workers graduates from Shanghai, from Guangzhou, to move to Shenzhen to work in these social worker agencies. And the social worker agencies actually is strengthened the operating organizations in the social value chain. So social organizations in Shenzhen and also witnessed a growth, right? So this table summarizes the 3 models. So Beijing is a top-down model, Shenzhen is a bottom-up model, and Shanghai is a platform model. Beijing is a top-down model because it first strengthened, it top-down reformed the gangos and make them become infrastructure and financial organizations. Shenzhen is a bottom-up model because it has opened direct registration for grassroots NGOs and make them easier to become operating organizations. And Shanghai is a platform model because Shanghai established non-profit incubators, social innovation park, this kind of platforms, and then government procurement of services goes through these platforms. So there are different models, and these models originated from these 3 cities and then gradually spread to other cities around China. So when different regions, different cities have adopted their 3 models, a new social market actually is emerging in China. Okay, let me make the brief conclusion and discussions. So this research addressed two overarching questions. So what kind of social sector organizations are more likely to achieve policy change, and how and why they achieve policy change? And my research argued that organizations that have transformed to social enterprises or they obtain government contracts for purchasing services are more likely to achieve policy change. As I have already demonstrated in the quantitative analysis that the two variables are statistically significant after controlling other variables. And this research subsequently used NPI and CFC as two typical cases to show how the two organizations succeeded in promoting five policy change in China. And the underlying of their success is actually the formation of social value chains, and which consist of 5 different organizations. And the formation of social value chains has equipped these organizations to create positive social change. And this positive social change inspired the government or pressured the government to change its policy, to absorb the social innovation as a part of their policy. And this study further applies the perspective of social value chains to examine Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, the 3 cities, and find that the 3 cities has developed 3 distinctive models in managing social sector organizations. And the contribution of this research is that it finds a positive relationship between social marketization and policy change, and reveals the process and the underlying mechanism. So in contrast with the existing research, which has a claim that the marketization of the social sector strengthens civil society in the United Kingdom or in the United States, this research suggests that social marketization may strengthen the development of civil society in China and the UK through the incremental social change and policy change. And the implication of this research is that it may have provided an alternative pathway to build a civil society in the Chinese context, in the developing countries. We know that for NGOs and in the developed countries that they fight for their independence, right? They reducing the state control. They balance the state. This kind of approach has made a strong civil society in the Western country. However, this antagonistic way may be not that effective in China. And social marketization can provide an alternative way to construct a civil society in the Chinese context. Because if social organizations can use marketized strategies, can use entrepreneurial strategies to address social problems and become professional, and they create a positive social change, they promote social change, and they use this social change to influence government policy, to promote the policy change. And they are still able to change government policy, and they are still able to make the state accountable. This is a lengthy process, but this is the soft power of social organizations, and probably it can be more feasible to construct a civil society in a Chinese context. And this is my present research, and my future research, I would like to highlight the three keywords: the social entrepreneurship, social innovation, and social impact and policy impact. My present research is, based on my past research, we can find that social impact or social change is very important. It can, to some extent, change the government policy, right? But we still need to ask, where does the social impact come from? Where does the social change has been created? So I would highlight the role of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. They are from the grassroots level, but they can be scaled up. So how the organizations, how the non-profit organizations, how the for-profit organizations, how the government organizations can use skills of social entrepreneurship, how they can draw on social innovation to address social problems, meet social demands, and create social values. These are very interesting. And how they create social impact, how they measure social impact, how they evaluate social impact, how they scale up social impact. These are important questions. And in terms of scale social impact, the present research, the existing literature are always discussing the scaling out or scaling wide. So how they scale the organizations. These organizations need more money, they need serving more people, they need spread to more geographical regions, right? This is the focus of existing literature. However, I think the more important question is how to scaling up and scale deep. So scale up, like my present research, changing government policy is one of measurement of scaling up, but other indicators like whether the organization can change legitimacies or laws, whether they can establish a social movement, whether they can create a new field or industry. And scale deep means whether the organization can address social problems more effectively and more efficiently, whether they can change the public awareness, public perception of a social issue, of social problem, and whether they can change people's values, the norms, the cultures. These questions I would be very interesting and important. And for my future research, I would like, maybe not all, but definitely this kind of topic. I will dig deeper into this kind of topics. And to scale up social impact, not to scale organizations, right? We need a new framework. We need I call this a ecosystem framework. So social impact is what we want. And currently, we have organizations, whether it's a social enterprises or charities or government organizations, and they need to develop social innovative strategies to create social impact, to scale up social impact. And they need to use the technology and data to create a social impact. They need technology and data for social good. And they need financing. They need, social impact investing. They need donations. They need government procurement of their services. They need PPPs and this kind of thing. And government policy, whether support or non-support, they are still a critical factor to influence their activities, to influence the creation of the social impact. And another factor that is often ignored by existing literature is what I call institutional infrastructure, like incubators, like social innovation park, like infrastructures, platforms, consulting firms in the nonprofit sector, accounting firms, law firms, this kind of organizations working in the social sector. These are actually very important infrastructure for the maturity of the ecosystem of creating social impact. Basically, this is my future, what I thought could be the future research. And to give more details, I would recommend the 4 articles which provides more details of that research I already presented. And furthermore, I list some Chinese articles which give further information about the different like incubator, like community foundations, like social impact hubs, so on and so forth. Yeah, this is my presentation. Thank you very much.